So let's start with anger because, in between my rainmaking activities in the dry alpine West, I also make time for stupid arguments over breakfast, one of which I had this morning. I think that was also precipitated by yours truly, so not all great things. And you mentioned you have a number of stories before we started recording related to anger. So let's start there, and I'll let you lead wherever you think it makes sense.
I will, but let me ask you a question first. Why do you ask about anger? What is your intention, or what makes you ask?
Well, I ask about anger because I notice as I reflect on not just my own behavior, but behavior that is common in my family, a tendency towards perhaps an emotional home base of anger. It's a very familiar feeling, and I recognize how it can be corrosive. And I've spoken to people who have wanted to discuss their respective perspectives on, say, clean anger. I have tried to contend with it in different ways. Some have suggested fully expressing it, hitting a pillow, working on a punching bag. That tends to amplify and perpetuate anger in me. So it does not have the desired effect of dissipating anger at all. It just turns it from a 7 to a 10. And it's something I want to work on because I also recognize that even when I convey neutral content from the perspective of the words that I choose, sometimes my tone has an undercurrent of anger, and that causes strife. That causes arguments. That causes various types of tension, and a lot of it, most of it, is not helpful. So that is part of why I ask. And if I may just add one more thing, from a macro societal perspective, I have never seen more polarization and anger than I see today. Just observing this audience of, let's call it 10 to 20 million people a month. As I look at all of it from a 30,000 foot view, I have never seen so much anger and hostility ever in all my time on this planet. So that's also frightening.
So that really helps me a lot because your openness about it is actually what we need. If we bury it or stuff it, it just festers. And as you say, you can try to be nice and then it seeps out in the tone of your voice. And people feel that. We resonate with one another. It's not a complicated thing. You could call it mystical, but if you put a violin on the table and somebody else plays a violin nearby, the strings of both of them will resonate. And so, yes, there you're looking so nice, and then that little stuff seeps out. So I've really had to wrestle with anger a lot. And the Greeks call it a noble emotion, the philosophers, because there's something of value in it. So the first thing I want to say is that anger in itself isn't bad. It's difficult to work with, but it's not a bad thing. It's something for us to understand because it's part of human incarnation. And often the anger comes out of hurt or it comes out of fear, ways that we feel vulnerable. It's a way of protecting ourselves. James Baldwin said, I believe the reason that people cling to their hate and anger so stubbornly is because they're afraid that once hate is gone, they'll be forced to face their own pain. And so we also project it on others, the ones that cause our pain and so forth. Instead, we get angry as if they were the ones making it happen. And we have the enemy du jour. It doesn't matter. Right now, it's Russia and everybody's cheering. We have the Pentagon is like, I don't know what to say. They're celebrating. We have a great enemy again and a bigger budget and so forth. But it can be the immigrants or the Mexicans or the blacks or the gays or the whoever it is, the enemy du jour, because we can't bear our insecurity and we can't bear the fact that we're vulnerable in certain ways and that what's out there is also part of us. So Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian author, when he was in the gulags writing these brilliant things and sent out into Siberia, he said, if only it were simple, if only we could just round up the evil people and get rid of them. But the problem is the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who among us is willing to get rid of a piece of our own heart? So this is where we are as human beings. So here I am. I'm in the monastery. I did some years training as a Buddhist monk. And in my family, there were 4 boys, and we each had different roles. My brother got angry a lot. I think that was the healthiest in some way, because my father was angry, paranoid, wife batterer, somewhat mentally ill, and also a brilliant scientist who helped develop some of the first artificial hearts and lungs and did space medicine and stuff. But he was a terrifying figure in many ways. So I was the peacemaker in the family, trying to calm it down. I've now made that a profession. You know how that goes. And I go in the monastery, and I'm sitting, minding my own business, meditating, walking slowly in the forest in the remote part of Thailand on the border of Laos. That's an ascetic forest monastery. I wanted something tough. You know, we're young men. Is there anything dangerous to do around here? Let me try it. And I start to sit, and at some point, not that long in my time there, the first months, I start to get more and more irritated at the way the monks around me are behaving and the problems and, you know, this one and that one. And then I just notice that I'm getting angrier. And all of a sudden I realize that I have a lot of anger. It just starts boiling up because there's no distraction and I can't put it on somebody else really. And so I go to talk to my teacher about it. I said, you know, all this anger is bubbling up. And basically, it shocked me because I thought I was a peaceful person. And mostly, I just didn't want to be like my father and hurt people. So I'm not going to be like him. But it turns out he's in there and it's all in there. And I tell Ajahn Chah, my teacher, and he looks at me and he says, good. He said, great, this is what you need to look at. He said, I want you to go back to your little hut, had a tin roof, you know, close the one window and door, put on all your robes. This is the hot season. And if you're going to be angry, do it right. He didn't say go beat something. He just said, sit in the middle of it, take the seat and feel the fire of it and learn, first of all, learn to tolerate it. Because part of what happens with anger is when we can't tolerate the emotions and so forth, then we lash out or it leaks in our words. And he said, so go and sit and bring your mindfulness to it and learn to tolerate it, because a lot of the power of meditation, as the neuroscientists say, is to increase the window of tolerance so you don't get reactive to things, but you have the ability to feel things fully and then decide how to express it. So I sit there, and after a while, it's like, okay, anger comes, and the great image in the Buddhist teaching is of the Buddha seated under the tree of enlightenment, that big world story or myth. And while he's sitting there, he gets attacked by the armies of Mara. You have no right to sit here. Mara comes as doubt. Mara brings temptations, you know, and then it was all the beautiful maidens and a golden chariot. You could have all these things. The Buddha says, no, been there, done that. You know, I want something freer than that. And then Mara attacks him with spears and flaming arrows and things. And the Buddha's response is to say, I see you, Mara. Mara comes back other times in Buddha's life. And the main thing that the Buddha does, he doesn't fight Mara, he says, I see who you are, I see you. And in that, you can feel that there's a freedom in the heart, a spaciousness to be present for it. So I get better with this shit, right? I'm okay, now I'm not quite so angry. I know I have it. I leave the monastery after some years. I go back to New England, where I'd been last, hook up with an old girlfriend who was great. She was doing graduate teaching at Harvard. And very quickly we get into conflict. And I realized, okay, it's one thing to deal with anger in myself, but being a monk, I had no training in how to deal with relationship, you know, and going back was hard. People talk about leaving the monastery, going back to their family. They forget that both Jesus and Buddha had a hard time when they went home to their family. This is like the real place. So I'm there with this woman, And all my neurosis comes up, my neediness, my whatever, fears, all the things around intimacy that I didn't have to deal with as a monk. So I start to do that, and I realized the anger is building up again. She was great, actually. She said, "Okay, you dealt with it in yourself. Now let's do this together." So she says, "Come with me." She had an old Volvo station wagon, and in the back, she had 10 cases, big cases of bottles. And she said, "Come with me." She drove me to an old place where they were demolishing a brick building. She said, "All right, get out. I want you to throw those suckers at the wall, and say whatever you have. So you just, about me, whatever, just let it out. Not so much as pounding the bag, but just making it all conscious. It wasn't like I have to do that every day." And then I went into a Reichian therapy, and this guy said, "You have the monk's defense. You can be aware of anything, but you're afraid to actually express it." So he said,
Jack, may I interrupt for a second? What type of therapist was that?
He worked with Wilhelm Reich, who was a contemporary right after Freud, who worked with the energy and sexuality of the body. And he asked me, "What time of day is hardest for you?" And I said, "Morning. I'm not a morning person." He said, "Great. I'll see you at 6 a.m. when your defenses are down." So I go in, and he has me do these breathing exercises to charge up my body, plays some evocative music, and starts working on my body, saying, "You've got to let this stuff out, whatever it is." Okay. He worked on my body so hard one day he cracked 2 ribs, actually.
Oh,
but I wept, I cried, I got angry, I did all these things. So this was part of my learning it. And now I'm a lot less afraid of it, and therefore I also can use it. So when I had my house being rebuilt, and we were supposed to go to Europe, and the contractor, who was a good guy, kept saying, we're a little behind. I said, you got to finish before we travel for a long time. He's putting it off. And I kept asking, nice guy that I am, and he says, "Oh, finally." I said, "We've only got a month to go, and you little teams." And I yelled at him. I said, "Man, if you don't finish this, I'm going to sue your ass in court. I'm going to get it. I'm just tired of this shit." And I'm really angry. And he looks at me and says, "Oh, you really want it done, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." Next day, he sent a triple crew. And I realized that I simply needed to speak contractorese. I was kind of speaking like a Buddhist monk, but that was not his language. So it became easier in some way to work with it and to realize that, I have my own inner Taliban. I have my own inner Iron Curtain. It's not just out there. And by taking this energy and saying, yes, this is something that I can work with, it just becomes much easier for me, and it runs through me quicker. It's not that it doesn't. I mean, I watch Thich Nhat Hanh or the Dalai Lama get angry or upset. So it's not like it won't. It's part of us. And then I guess the last thing to say, because it also allows for a kind of graciousness about it. When I see myself getting angry, if you really look, when I really look, underneath anger is hurt or fear or some kind of humiliation or something like that, where you feel like you've been disrespected. And if I can drop from the anger to say, what's under this? And then express it and say, I really feel hurt when you say that, or that makes me afraid. That very conflict with another person or a group of people, it changes from being, I'm right and you're wrong, to this hurts, or I'm afraid about this. And we can have a genuine conversation that's entirely different.